Despite those heroics from Raya, there were more drop points for Arsenal, and it means that there's a 15-point gap between Arsenal and the league leaders, Liverpool. The Gunners do have a game in hand, but it is looking more and more likely that the trophy will be heading to Merseyside. What is very much not decided is which teams will secure Champions League football next term. There's only 7 points separating the same number of teams. European football could be on the cards for pretty much anyone in the top half and possibly into the bottom half of the table as well. At the other end, none of the bottom three secured a point this weekend, so it just left Wolves to lift themselves further above the drop zone. That gap is now 6 points. We'll be discussing that battle to survive in more depth in part 3, but we are going to start with yesterday's game at Old Trafford. With us today, Owen Hargreaves, Flo Lloyd Hughes is here. Righty, it's not impossible for Arsenal. If you were going to sum up the difficulty level, though, what would you say?
Well, you're kind of getting close to impossible, Kels. I'm not joking. It's tough now. I thought it was a game that you probably needed to win just so as then you can win the next game. Because remember, Arsenal have got to win all of the games. So to win the next game, and I thought that they needed something out of that yesterday, but I thought when you looked at the way we were trying to create, it just kept continually falling short at the critical point, the final ball, the pass through, everything. It's just looks to me like a team. As the fact that the strikers, people keep saying about strikers, but the forwards that have been needed for the whole of this season, you probably needed them in a game like that yesterday. And it was a shame you didn't see someone like Raheem Sterling come off the bench. They put on Kieran Tierney instead, which says a lot about what he thinks of that situation. So it really felt a bit like of a resignation yesterday. You're seeing something that, I hope this team now, they have to find something to keep going. Watch behind your back now, because it looks like it's Liverpool's. So you just have to keep going and finish the season really well now, I think.
That was what was interesting about the game, that Man United really galvanised themselves for this match. But for Arsenal, what do you put down the fact that that it wasn't working for them in the final third?
I actually thought they played really well first half. If they took one or two of those chances, I think they would have won the game quite comfortably. But then one long ball from Onana at the end of it, Mazraoui wins a flick, Garnacho gets a free kick and Bruno scores. Up to that point, I don't think United barely had the ball and barely had a shot on target.
I don't think they did.
And I think Arsenal had loads of time to kind of figure that out and get back into the game. But I do think they were probably shocked by that goal because they were so dominant, Arsenal. And I'm with Righty. They played nice up into the box, but if you think you're going to go to Old Trafford with Neri's an amazing player, but he's only 17. That's the first bad game I've seen him out. And Marino as a number 9. I think that in a way, they've overachieved being second with that, playing like that without a striker. The injuries are remarkable. They need at least 2 more bodies, I think, to compete. They needed
that before the injuries came.
They need 2 more bodies to compete with the top. I think they've done amazing to even be second with, lacking a number 9.
Yeah, but it looks as though that game at Old Trafford might be the one that sort of tipped people from saying, well, it's probably going to end up in Liverpool hands, to this is looking pretty much, as Righty said, nearly impossible for Arsenal.
Yeah, I think so. And the injury issues, the fact that they're still a problem, I don't see the situation changing. If you could say there are a lot of players coming back quite quickly, the fact is for Havertz and Gabriel Jesus, those are long-term absences. And Saka, I think obviously he's going to be back a little bit sooner than the rest, but they won't want to rush him because that's the type of injury that can become a long-term problem for a player, and they need him so much. And obviously it's probably good for a lot of international players with no Euros this summer, because I think a lot of England players are kind of suffering as a result of that. But I don't see a way in a corner can be turned for Arsenal because there's not a transfer window now for this rest of the season, and they don't have these players coming back. We think that will change everything. This is the squad they've got to work with, and that's the best they can get. And I agree with Owen as well. I think in the situation they're in, without having a striker, I think they're still playing well, but there's no focal point, there's no penetration whatsoever. It's all kind of movement outside the box. The person doing the most running and getting to good positions is Declan Rice. He is the one who is getting run into the box, is trying to get into good areas, trying to make things happen. And I think that's a lot of pressure on him. He's already kind of taking on a big load and a big responsibility. But I think without him, I don't see ways they can be dangerous.
Yeah.
But we keep coming back to this point about injuries for Arsenal across the course of this season. When you look at the list of players who are injured, and when you look at the reasons for their injuries, is there an argument that they they could have managed this a little bit better. One of the reasons that Arne Slot was brought into Liverpool was his ability to keep players fit. If it's hamstring injuries, are they the kind of injuries that come because of, can you look at them?
They're working too hard in training?
What I'm wondering, well, we don't know if they're working too hard in training, but are they the kind of questions that Arsenal will be asking come the end of the season? Are there ways that we could have kept those players fit for more of the season?
They're going to have to, Kels, because we had a season last season, because now all of a sudden I think what we're going to do, we're going to blame the sports science department, when last season we hardly had any injuries. And we saw the season before we did.
Even if you go to the season before, it was Saliba at the end, which was a back injury, and it was. I just wonder if there was something. Yeah, but then
the question is, Kels, was it luck? Look, obviously you're losing Saliba. So was it luck last season, or was it the sports science? Because it's something that they're going to have to look at. Because when you look at some of those injuries, there's 3 of those injuries are hamstring injuries, which is obviously says which is a lot of work as to why your hamstring in the end goes. And we've seen with Saka's, I think it came away. It's a massive injury that he's had to have surgery on. And that is always a worry to hear when you're having surgery on a hamstring, because normally it's a pull. But yeah, those things will have to be looked at.
Going off to warm weather training and getting injured on warm weather. In Dubai they went to, wasn't it, for their warm weather training? Well, does that set any alarm bells ringing for you, do you think?
With that one, I'm not... I don't know what to say.
I just mean in the mix.
Thing is because you're going out there and it could have been innocuous the way it happened, with the hamstring, winding down, whatever it is. I don't know how it came about, but then if it's something that could have been avoided, Kels, I'm sure that they're not going to have someone like Kai Havertz on the break doing sprints. So it would have been something that's happened maybe in the game. I don't know what the scenario was, but again, because it's a hamstring injury, because of the amount of games that Hazard has had to play, the work that, remember, these players have to do for Mikel and getting back as well, because even with Jesus injured himself on the edge of our area when he got injured, when he done his hamstring. So there's a lot of work that's going into it. So those things probably have to be looked at. Of course they do. Because in the end, you have to point to, the injuries have cost us to a certain extent, but can we avoid those? And we have to find a way too. And
they have been particularly prevalent in terms of attacking players for Arsenal. That's where they've really missed that. And the question is constantly asked, do Arsenal need another striker? And they were asked actually before the injuries as well. Mikel Arteta is absolutely sick of that question at the moment. But is it a valid one to ask?
Well, I don't even think it's just a striker. Of course they need a striker. If anything, they probably need 2. But if you look at, they let Eddie Nketiah go, maybe rightly so because he wasn't getting the game time. But again, to give Kai the opportunity to get a rest, give Saka a rest. I think Arsenal were lucky these guys didn't break down last year. They were so stable in the fact that and maybe that's why they didn't recruit players. They thought these boys would be fit, but actually it's not a surprise that they've broken down, because you can't keep playing 60 games at high intensity with the demands, mentally, physically, emotionally. I think it's a lot to ask of anyone. So if you had Smith Rowe, if you had Reece Nelson, if you had Nketiah, Balogun, if you would have had someone, you could have played them for 15 games each and give Saka and Havertz and Ødegaard a little bit of a rest. So I do think that they're short in terms of numbers, but I do think they need a couple of strikers, not just one.
This summer, I think, Flo is massive. They're going to spend
big, aren't they?
They have to. I think it's go big or go home, honestly. And obviously they're going to have a new sporting director coming in. And there'll be a lot of expectation and pressure on them. But I think they have to go huge, because I think, unfortunately, we're in an era now where people have had to try and keep up with Manchester City and the obviously kind of legacy of those wins and the squad that they built and what they invested. And then you're now maybe at the beginning of what Arne Slot could do with Liverpool, and they're going to tool up again in the summer. So how are you going to match that? Because being second best and chasing and not being good enough, there's nothing to show for that. And a lot of people obviously understandably give Arsenal credit for pushing City as far as they have in recent seasons. But they have to try and keep up and deliver more, because I just don't think it's enough to say on its own that that is an achievement. And they have to go big. And I think the physical demands of the game now are just so different than they even were in, Fergie's dominance time, in terms of, I know scouted who, do loads of work on kind of young players and write about them. They did a graph about how the individual sprints that players are having to make and the physical demands on their body have changed so much even in the last 10 years. So you're having to really recruit athletes first and then technically gifted footballers second. And I think, unfortunately, when you're competing with the likes of Manchester City and Liverpool, who've probably been a bit lucky with how few injuries they've had, I think it's really tough.
Or have managed their their season well. If you've got a manager will come to Liverpool in a second, but from what we read, this was one of the attributes that came into the mix in terms of appointing Arne Slot.
And
Liverpool was an ability to manage players over the season. And when you start to get injuries, then you've got a narrow pool of players to choose from, and the problem.
But they have 2 players for every position. Liverpool. Yeah. With goalkeeper, fullbacks, centre backs, centre mid. They got 10 strikers.
And Arne Slot's playing style is a little less intense as maybe like Klopp, and maybe that
in a post-Euro season. That's maybe a more sensible way to go.
Maybe it is. Yeah.
Right. Just in terms of the demands on the players' bodies, but I just wonder, with the new sporting director coming in, how much of a difference you think that will make across this summer, and because there was a point made in the coverage yesterday of the game, and I can't remember who made the point, but that it feels that in the transfer market at times Arsenal have been playing catch up. It's everybody else because they need to sort out the defence. Then the defenders came in. Then everybody's been saying for ages they need a striker, and they haven't quite got there yet. But now that seems like it's a priority.
Maybe Andrea Berta, who I'm quite pleased is coming now. And he can really have a look at everything what's there, set up and what's going on. I think it's great that they haven't brought Ato, I think his name's Ato, Jason Ato, up from who was helping Edu, because I think that probably Mikel needs another voice as well, a voice of experience. With Berta, he's been very Atletico Madrid, 12 years, 2 La Ligas, he's chased down Real Madrid, he's chasing down Barcelona, 2 La Ligas and 2 Champions League finals he's been to, so he's got the experience. You're just going to hope that he's got the network to find the kind of players that, when you look at Arsenal's players now, where we're getting down to this end of the season and it feels like we need a bit more, you need that player who's ready to go to that step, and hopefully he'll have enough time so that by the time the summer comes, he can locate those players and get those players in as early as possible. Because I think that Arsenal, at the start, in the summer, people will be looking, and they're going to need to start well again. They're going to need to make the kind of signings, like everybody, like you say, rightly so, they're going to tool up. Arsenal have to get into that party so as they can be ready to go.
Yeah, I think they're a very well-run football club, and I think, unfortunately, when you're chasing down a Premier League title, perhaps you need to take a few more risks, and I think Arsenal have taken risks with some of their recruitment. For example, Fabio Vieira, probably a player that a lot of people would agree haven't worked out. I mean, there's been handfuls of those, but they haven't spent huge amounts of cash on players that you never see kind of make much of an impact. Whereas for a club like Manchester City, they do that, and they take more risks. And perhaps, the really shrewd and successful way that Arsenal have been run over the last decade, maybe it's
too safe.
I think it's a little bit of that. I think, a lot of the recruitment they've done, I think defensively is really, really strong. I think perhaps Kai Havertz has overachieved on the expectations. I think a lot of Chelsea fans would have said they maybe wouldn't have expected him to hit the numbers that he has done for Arsenal. But I think probably they have tried to do things the right way because they, are being more financially conscious, and that's no bad thing. But obviously, with fans, they want to see success on the pitch, and I do think,
especially when you get that close.
I do think Arsenal as well. A lot has to be asked about their performances in cup competitions too, because yes, they've got.
We can't say that off the back of a 7-1 win.
Well, they've got a huge advantage in the Champions League, but no FA Cup final appearance since obviously Arteta won his first trophy. Keep getting knocked out in the early rounds. And League Cup as well, they had a huge opportunity with that Newcastle tie. So I think that's the disappointment as well. If you're going to push someone to, the final days in the Premier League, it would, I think, get more credit in the bag if they had other cups.
Might have a chance to come back to that, because I think it's an interesting one on getting that mentality, and it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on that, Owen. But as we mentioned earlier, Mikel Arteta is getting very frustrated with being asked about the transfer window.
Do you excuse the players a little bit, at least, when you look at the concentration of injuries you've got in that forward line? Obviously Martinelli comes on, but no Saka, no Havertz, no Jesus.
I mean, I would defend my players all the time because the will to do what they want is no question about that. But in those moments, we have to be better as a team. That's it.
And do you regret not signing a striker in January? Perhaps that extra player? No, it's not about that?
No, it's not about that.
Okay, Mikel, one more. I have to ask you about the title race, because it's 15 points now. Is it too much? Right.
Right, they're the 2 questions he doesn't want then. But they are the 2 questions that he's going to be. I said the first 2 questions that we started off, the first 2 points that we started off talking about, is the title race done now? And is the Arsenal's inability or not signing a striker in previous transfer windows going to cost them this season? They're valid questions.
They're valid questions. They've been
and
asked.
actually very politely asked.
Yeah, very politely asked. But but like at the same time, ask at a time where he knows it's going to, after the game, emotions are still high. Asked at a time where he knows that he's going to get some form of reaction. He's been asked that for how long now?
But that's
until they sign a striker.
Until they sign a striker.
But they know they will keep being asked. They know it's coming.
I think he's done brilliantly.
But he's probably annoyed. He knew the title race was over.
Oh, 100%.
In that interview there.
Yeah.
And he was probably cooking inside because he knew if the club probably would have backed him and he would have had a striker, he probably could have gone to Old Trafford and won by 3 or 4.
Exactly.
But because he didn't have it, and then he probably doesn't want to throw the club under the bus, so he goes...
He's better
off not answering it, by the way.
Let's not say nothing.
Yeah.
Because if he said what he would have wanted to say, a few people would have got it.
I can totally understand how he's angry.
But it's the reaction, because you can say, look, I'm not going to, comment on that, or however you want to phrase it.
He could have worded it
but
better.
he's not that guy.
However you want to phrase it. But
he's not
you
that
actually
guy.
cause more kind of drama if you walk off and essentially refuse to give any answer. That's the worst.
Because he wants to win. I think he realised...
That's what it comes down to.
We could potentially win the Premier League, maybe even the Champions League, but we don't have the bodies anymore.
Yeah.
And we played actually amazing in the first half and somehow tied the game, which they could have lost. And I think that is... I've been there when you're after the game, you think people ask you the worst questions and you literally just so annoyed you want to...
You know what as well?
Sometimes you're better off just walking away.
Oh,
it's not even like the worst question. It's just the fact. It's the timing.
It's the timing.
I don't think they are the worst.
They're not bad questions at all.
And they're also... And also the timing is when you get access to the manager, which is...
It's always going to be...
But does he sign the strikers? Probably not.
Well,
the club should have, shouldn't they?
But you can say it's
But again, if he does that, then he's critical of his employer, isn't he?
Yeah.
So it's like I can understand. It doesn't look great. I agree with Flo, but he's in a tricky spot because he needs to look after his players. His best ones are injured, and he doesn't want to throw the club under the bus. Everybody knows they need a striker. Anybody in the world knows it. They don't need one; they need two.
Honestly, he's like pinching him with it. He's like, the thing is, it's like you see with like Arne Slot. You know what I mean? I don't know what he said to the referee, but he's suspended in that. I think that what happens with Mikel is like Mikel does things, and people just take it so far.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't know what Arne Slot would have said to it.
If another manager had done that, we wouldn't be highlighting it. Is that what you're saying?
It's not a case of not highlighting it, but like you're going to highlight it because when someone walks out of an interview, everybody's like, ooh. But the fact is, it's a question at a time. It's just for me. Why did he stop him to say one more?
He would have done more damage if he said an answer.
Because he had to get his thoughts on the title race.
That's his job to ask tough questions, isn't it?
Yeah. We all know it is the simplest question, but it's the question that always is going to be answered. And all you need to do is give the easy, simple line that gives someone something. And that's the game. I would have said, obviously...
Now, sitting here, it's easy,
obviously it's disappointing, but we're going to have to reassess and go again.
You know, look at... You see, I'll tell you what I like. Maybe he should have taken a leaf out of Arne Slot's book because Arne Slot always looks calm and collected.
But he's winning.
But he said something that's got him suspended.
And you are tested your most if you are... Top managers always want to win and they're sore losers, right? So that is when you are tested the most, when you have to come and answer these mundane media questions, which are irritating, and it's how you respond there in those moments that people will judge you. If they had won that game, no one would have been talking about his answers probably at all.
In hindsight, I reckon he wishes he had a better poker face, but he realised he just threw the title race away.
And I think, unfortunately, he, at the same time, had shown that again sometimes in interviews where he does look a little bit rattled. And, I think it's hard when you feel like on the cards you've been dealt with your squad. I would be frustrated with the situation, but you have to just play the game.
People pick on Mikel as well. They do. I remember you look at him against Man City. Against Man City, he was doing his stuff on the sidelines. Pep kicked a chair. No one said a word.
I don't even know what anybody said about Mikel Arteta.
So then, but the thing is that when you look at Mikel's persona when you listen to fan bases, listen to managers, listen to pundits, some pundits in there, they don't like Mikel for some reason. They don't like him.
I quite like him.
Obviously, I love him.
I think
they don't like him.
When it comes to Guardiola, I think Guardiola has had the same sort of reactions in post-match interviews too. All of these managers, even Klopp, Klopp was one of the most well-loved Liverpool managers and Premier League managers of all time. But even he still lost his head sometimes in interviews. It's expected, but people remember it when you lose your head. They don't remember it when you just dismiss a question. And that's the challenge.
I wonder as well if it goes back a little bit to what you were saying earlier, Flo, in that it's not about this game. It's not even necessarily just about this season. It's about the fact that there hasn't been a trophy since his first partial season in charge. There hasn't even been a final in that time. And even in the times where they were running Manchester City close, it didn't go down to the final day. It kind of limped a little bit to the end. And now, in the season where Manchester City are off their game, Arsenal haven't been able to challenge the leaders at the top of the division, that they're 15 points clear. I wonder if it's a accumulation of those seasons. And that goes back to that sort of winning mentality that you were saying. You can understand why a manager would prioritise the Premier League and the Champions League over the FA Cup and League Cup. But there is something to be said, Jose Mourinho used to say it all the time, in winning, just winning a trophy.
I think Mikel's done his job. From where he took over that football club to where they are now is almost unrecognisable. And we did the game yesterday, right, and there was a graphic in terms of 200 games. Yesterday was 200th game. And he's up there with
I think it's
5 managers ahead
Ferguson,
of him. Pep. It's a Hall
Klopp.
of Fame list and he's 6th.
But can he get them over the line?
No, but the point is, his body work right now suggests when he finishes, he'll be a Hall of Fame manager in the Premier League. That's a fact, based on the numbers that we saw 200 games in.
But
I don't think
not based on trophies.
No, exactly. But you can't go to Old Trafford with Mourinho and Nwaneri as a 17-year-old who's brilliant, by the way, and expect to go win the Premier League. It's ridiculous. The club need to back him and get a couple of strikers. I think he's done his job amazingly. But at some point, you need... Back in the day, they had Thierry, Bergkamp, Perez, Overmars, Wiltord, Wrighty, go on forever here, Ljungberg. And now they're rolling up with Kai Havertz, who's 10. I think they've overachieved. I really do. I think they're right there. Go spend the money, because you wouldn't want to look back with regret and say, we could have.
We could have, yeah. That's the problem.
Go spend some money and go win the Premier League and the Champions League. You're right there. What are you waiting for?
It's going to happen.